بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. So at this point, Imam Ghazāli starts breaking down the riya and what that means and the different types and the dangers of it. The first type he mentions is talking about is showing off. Showing off is something that we had spent a lot of time discussing, a lot of time talking about, what that entails and how it could be both in a dunyawi sense and it can be in a ukhrawi sense. It can have to do with the afterlife as well. He also talks about having mixed intentions. So a person can fall purely into riya, meaning that when I go to stand in prayer, what is my intention? Right, to show other people that I am righteous, right, to give that position. The next type he mentions is mixed, meaning that I'm doing it for people and I'm doing it for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he says that this type is actually more dangerous, and we'll talk about that inshallah. So this one is something that invalidates the action itself. So if I'm praying and my intention is to make other people think something of me, what do I do at that point? I invalidate the action completely. And in this situation, he says this is minor shirk, right? This is shirk al-khafi, and then we'll talk about the hadith that I'm sure many of you are familiar with, and what the relationship is, and what that means, and what are the dangers of minor shirk, and why is it placed above that. And we had talked about before that if you actually created a totem pole of these things, number one would be shirk. Obviously, this is something that's not forgivable. The next after that would be minor shirk, and then it would be riya. So what is the effect of all of these different actions, and how would that actually look? So he says that why is minor shirk worse than the riya? He says because it's like mocking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And why is that? Is because and he brings the similitude of standing in front of a king. So basically you're standing in front of this king, you act like a servant, but you don't want to show the king, like you're not doing it to please the king, you're doing it to please others, right? So he's saying here that if you show that you're doing this action, and you're showing that you're a servant of this king, but you're actually doing it for the sake of others, he said this is like mocking that king. And he said similar to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if I have this mixed intention, it's like, okay, I'm praying for Allah, and I want, so, are you guys understanding the difference, or should I spend a little bit more time on it? Okay. So, I'm sorry? Right, you're trying to cover both bases. Say, okay, basically what's happening in the second scenario, when we talk about minor shirk, is that this person has two intentions, right? He doesn't, the other scenario, how many intentions does he have? He just has one, right? That intention is purely for the people, even though the action looks like he's doing it for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yes? No, I don't want to say it's nifaq. Nifaq is a little bit different, because nifaq, we said there's different levels to nifaq. Is showing off a type of nifaq? Is it a type of hypocrisy? Yes, absolutely, right? Because I'm showing something that I don't believe, right? The prayer that I'm doing should be for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It should be to draw near to Him. It should be to stay away from evil, etc., etc. But I'm doing it for someone else. I'm doing it for others. In the second scenario of minor shirk, I'm doing it for two, right? I'm doing it for people and I'm doing it for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the problem, and this is the issue. And this is why it's considered minor shirk. And he said that in the second one, right, so what he's done is something called talazum, and he says that, okay, if you do this, it means this, which is not always the case. And it becomes a very slippery slope when you start talking in terms of that. So an example of this would be like, so he came to the masjid, and because he came to the masjid is a place for righteous people, therefore he is righteous, right? It is not necessary that that line of reasoning works every single time. Is it a possible line of reasoning? Yes, and it's the same thing that he's doing here, right? Is this a possible? Does that person actually believe that they're above Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? No, right? The purpose of him stating something like this is that, right, because this is an actual possibility, you are essentially mocking and making fun of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right, you're just, all of these actions that you're doing, right? You're claiming and you're saying that you're doing it for Him. But if you're doing it for Him, it should be for Him alone. In the moment that you do shirk, right, because you're sharing in that, you have fallen into and you have committed this minor shirk. So he says that seeking prestige in this way, he's like, it's a very backwards way of seeking that status. Right? This is not, it's not straightforward. It's very backwards. It's very strange. It's very odd. And if an individual wants to do this, it's like taking it's an odd route to achieve a goal that is not practical. And the example he gives here again is the king. Is that okay? Well, when you do this, right? When you have the split intention between the people and Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, you are now equating those two, right? This is part of the problem, and this is why it's called minorship. Like the moment I equate a person with Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, I have committed that minorship, and not just that. Is it possible, or the idea that I'm presenting here, or that what Imam Ghazāli is saying, is that okay? Well, what are this person or these people giving you that Allah cannot? Or this is the major problem. This is the major issue. What is it that you're seeking from here that you cannot get here? Right? It could be anything, right? Usually, why do people perform acts of worship for others? Like, what benefit am I getting in publicly giving my sadaqah? Or what benefit am I getting reminding everybody that, today's Thursday, I was fasting today, right? Like, what benefit am I getting from that? Right? Other people's recognition. I'm trying to gain status in the hearts of others, right? That's the entire purpose behind showing off these actions. Nothing else. Like, I'm not going to get money from others, right? I'm not going to get wealth from others. I'm not going to benefit in that way. If I truly want to benefit, the benefit will come in my status in their hearts, right? How these people hold me in their hearts. And that's why many of these actions are performed in that particular way. So he says here that if I seek prestige, or I seek status through material things, not through worship. So I seek status through not having the nicest car, or having the biggest house, or having the most money, or having the best job. What is the ruling on that? He says it may be permissible. Why do you say that? So, having the nicest car, he mentions that it may be permissible to seek status through that. Why is that? Right, number one, it's not an issue of worship. What else? Yes? I'm sorry? Okay, because I have a solely dunyawi intention. Okay, that's fine too, right? And we said that all of those things are mubah. The same thing is like, if my intention to drink water is because I'm thirsty, am I rewarded? No. Am I punished? No. This is something that's mubah. It's permissible. It's very similar here. So he's saying that, okay, if it doesn't involve worship, like you had mentioned, it's purely for a dunyawi state, there is no reward or punishment associated with that. Are there times where that is commendable? Are there situations where that is commendable? Yes. In seeking status. Yes. Okay. Yes. Okay, right? Let's say, for example, an Imam. Is there an amount of status that I need to seek? Or no? Why? I need to earn people's trust, right? If I dress like a homeless guy, right, and I walked around and I didn't really interact with people because I wanted to give this sense of piety and like zealousness and like seclusion, what is going to happen? Are people going to trust me? No. They're going to be like, the man's really weird, right? Like, he's really strange. He's not relatable, right? So, and there are certain jobs where it requires that. And what kind of jobs are they? The ones that are usually in the public sphere, right? So the more public a job, the more status that person needs to seek in order to earn the trust of others. How much status does that person need to seek? Is there like a level 7? Right, that's it. It has to be just enough. How do we determine what's just enough? Right, that's a personal gauge. It's a very personal gauge, and it can be challenging, right? It can be difficult, but it is a very personal gauge on how, and so that's why having that sense of control, you're like, oh, did I overshoot? Is it too much? Learning how to have restraint, right? These are things that are extremely important. And the opposite of this is what we had spoken about as well when it came to wealth, right? Learning and understanding how to have that restraint. When is it too much? And we usually know when it's too much. So over here, he talks about, okay, well, when it is in worship, right? Having this, showing off in worship or having riyā in worship, he says that any type of showing off is a type of mocking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's very harsh, right? It's a very harsh description of that. Why? It's like you're almost, so basically what he's saying is like you're almost trying to fool Allah. Right? So when I'm standing in prayer, or I'm giving my sadaqah, or I'm fasting, can I fool Allah? Right? It's very silly to even imagine that we can fool Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, especially if I believe what? That He hears everything, that He sees everything, that He knows everything. Like, there's no way I can fool Him Azza wa Jal. So that's why he calls it a mockery, which is why it makes sense to call it a mockery. There are levels to riyā. Some types are worse than others. Some types are lesser than others. Where would you say is the worst type of riyā? Like, what should I make? So if we put this on a scale, on a spectrum, what would be the type, or in which situations should I work harder to avoid it? Or which situations is it less damaging? Okay, what types of worship? So like, I keep a miswak in my pocket, and like I show people that I do miswak. Right? No? Doesn't affect? Okay. What about dressing a certain way? No? Doesn't affect? But I want people to think I'm pious. Yes? Okay, so those actions that are specifically linked to, or that have a specific reward associated with them, good, right? That's very important. What else? Obligations, right? So the things we're obligated to do, I should make an extra effort to make sure that I'm not doing them out of riyā. The next step would be those things that you mentioned. That those things where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promises a specific reward for them. Like, I should never seek knowledge for other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's happiness. I should never give wealth except for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's happiness. I should never fight for Allah's cause except for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's happiness. And then all of these other ones we talked about, right? Like making clothing, using miswak, all of these other sunnah that He sallallahu alayhi wa sallam gave us, right? That would be the least. So it's important to understand how and what to avoid it in, and the levels of avoidance within them. So if I prostrated or bowed to someone other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if my intention was to draw near to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and it was directed to other than Allah, so in our Sharia, prostrating is prostrating to anyone other than Allah as well. It's haram, majus, right? It's not permissible. Yaqub alayhi salam, in the story of Yusuf, there are two prostrations that are mentioned. What are both of these prostrations? One, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala orders him to, he prostrates out of happiness, right? Out of happiness, he prostrates, he makes sajda. And in another prostration, what does he do? He prostrates to Yusuf alayhi salam. I'm sorry? So, because Yusuf alayhi salam, remember that he saw a dream, right? Inni ara ahada ashara kawkaban, right? I saw 11 heavenly bodies or objects, they were making sajda to me. And then, after they found Yusuf, all 11 of them, they prostrated to him. Why did they prostrate to him? Why did they make sajda? Were they worshiping him? No, obviously not. Huh? Or they're humbling themselves, right? It's a sign of respect. It's a sign of respect. Even in Japanese culture today, why do they sajda? Like, why do they prostrate to each other? No, they make sajda too. Huh? Right, to the emperor, sometimes to their senseis, to each other, right? So there are different ways for them, and it's a show of respect, right? It's a show of respect. It's a show of honor. So over here he says that in and of itself, like these two actions, in and of themselves are problematic if doing it for other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And why is he mentioning this? He's saying, okay, these are just individual actions. He said these are just the actions themselves. Just the superficial actions. He's not even talking about what? The person's intention. So he's saying, so how much more damaging can the wrong intention be to those actions? Like if just these individual superficial actions are problematic, what about the person's intention behind it? How much more damaging can that be?
So he's saying that
Yeah.
As long as my intention is not tolerating Allah, that's allowed.
No. So, no, number one, there's a difference of opinion there's a difference between bowing and making sajda. Bowing to others, this is makruh. This is disliked. Making sajda is haram. Right? Making sajda to other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is haram. But he's saying that both of these things are problematic in actions, in terms of actions in and of themselves. That's even if you remove the intention altogether.
The intention can make it worse.
And he's saying, okay, if these superficial actions of apparent worship are bad and problematic in and of themselves, what about actual actions of worship with the wrong intention behind them? Right? And how that's compounded and how that makes it significantly worse. So that's the point that he's bringing here, the point that he's trying to make. He closes this section by talking about the importance of sincerity and the importance of ikhlas. And sometimes this is a very challenging discussion, and sometimes it's difficult for us to get a grasp on what ikhlas and what sincerity should and does look like. But how he dealt with it here was by looking at its opposite, right? The opposite of sincerity is, for him, riyā. Right? It's not. You would imagine what is a logical opposite of sincerity? Insincerity, right? Being insincere for something, not being sincere. But he places here the opposites, like Islamically, what would be on the opposite spectrum? Riyā, and showing off. So he's saying that this is extremely problem. Like this is what the problem is. And if I learn the opposite of something, it helps me actually attain the goal of sincerity. Because it tells me and it shows me how my intention can stray. And he's showing that there's not that many pathways, right? How can my sincerity stray? The only place that he is mentioning here, the only place my sincerity will stray is toward what? Either it'll be for Allah or it'll be for, I'm sorry? For others, okay, but for who? Within an Islamic paradigm, my intention will be for Allah or it'll be for what? For people, right? When we talk about within the confine of worship, it's either going to be for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or it's going to be for people. And he's saying, now that you understand that these are the confines and this is the limitation, it is very easy for us to now help remove that part. Because what is the reason we do that is because we want status, right? And that's something that he discussed. So you can see his layered approach on why it is that he discusses these topics in this way. That if you understand the motivation for riyā, which is seeking status, and you understand the problems with seeking status and how to cure that, it becomes that much easier to cure riyā. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us from riyā. Ameen. The next chapter is the levels of showing off. So we had mentioned a little bit about this before. We had talked a little bit about riyā and what that means and what that entails and the levels of it. So he's saying that showing off there are three major components to this. There are three pillars to showing off. He said the one who shows off, so it's the individual, it's the person, the reason that he is showing off, and thirdly, his intention. These are the three elements that make up Riyā. And if I can conquer every single one of these elements. So the first pillar, he says that intention can be on levels. So he mentions four. My intention can be completely for people. And what do you think is on the other end of the spectrum? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Good. He says, so my intention can be for people, or it can be purely for worship, purely for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And within that, he mentions there are 4 grades. There are 4 grades. Why doesn't he move? How come he doesn't mention toward that spectrum? Because beyond that, now we're entering into worship. Right? Beyond that, we're entering into worship. Because the halfway point is what? Half of it is for Allah and half of it is for people. In the moment I move in that direction, it is now for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Can I be more, so even within that there are spectrums, right? So I can be for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And can I be more sincere? Yes, right? There's always room to be more sincere and to seek sincerity. So he's saying on the opposite spectrum for people, there's also a spectrum there. And he's saying all of these are the ones that are problematic. Right? So from the middle back, these are the problematic intentions. The second pillar, he says, so worship can be problematic, like when it comes to the individual, it can be problematic because of actual worship in and of itself, or the quality of that worship. These are the two elements that can be corrupted. He says that if it's in the root, that has to do with my iman. Right? Because it's not in the action anymore, it's in the actual root of the person's faith. And he says that this can have an effect on obligations. It can also have an effect on supererogatory or nawafil or extra deeds. And in terms of quality, how good each of those deeds are, right? The quality of my prayer, the quality of my zakah, the quality of my hajj, right? All of those things can be affected. He mentions a few verses. The first of them, إذا جاءك المنافقون قالوا نشهد إنك لرسول الله والله يعلم إنك لرسوله والله يشهد إن المنافقين لكاذبون. That when the hypocrites come to you, they say, we bear witness that you are the messenger of Allah. Allah knows that you truly are His messenger. Allah bears witness that the hypocrites are liars. He's saying that this is the first and most dangerous type of showing off, which is nifaq. Right? So we're talking about the root of, right? Because we said it can either be in the root or in the quality, and if it's in the root of the individual or the root of worship, the root of worship is belief. And if I'm showing off in my belief, right? Do you see the problem? If I'm showing off in my belief, that is nifaq. Second, he mentions, he mentions like 3 or 4 more ayah. He says, وَمِن النَّاسِ مَن يُعْجِبُكَ قَوْلُهُ فِي الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا ويشهد الله على ما في قلبه وهو ألد الخصام وإذا تولى سعي في الأرض ليفسد فيها. That there is a man, or there's a kind of man whose views on this life, this world may please you. He even calls on Allah to witness what is in his heart, yet he is the bitterest of opponents. When he leaves, he sets out to spread corruption in the land. Again, another verse talking about hypocrisy. وإذا لقوكم قالوا آمنا وإذا خلوا عضوا عليكم الأنامل من الغيظ. When they meet you, they say we believe. When they are alone, they bite their fingertips in rage at you. Again, talking about the munafiqeen. And lastly, يراؤون الناس ولا يذكرون الله إلا قليل يذكرون الله إلا قليل مذبذبين بين ذلك, showing off in front of people, remember Allah only a little, wavering all the time between this and that. So hypocrisy was more prevalent in the early days of Islam. Why? Like it's a very blanket statement, right? So he's saying nifaq was, you had more nifaq in early Islam versus today. I'm sorry? Okay.
You weren't sure if Islam was going to
Okay, so for those people who didn't believe, they're like, well, I'm not really sure where this religion is going to go, right? So I'm going to hedge my bets. If they're right, then what will I do? I'll benefit. And if they're wrong, what will I do? I'll go back to what I was on. Yes? Okay, why? So they wanted the Prophet ﷺ removed and destroyed, but the Quraysh wanted that too, and they didn't accept Islam. So what was unique about the Munafiqeen? No, I agree with that 100%, but why? Why show your Islam? Why not just stay on your religion? I'm sorry? What, their benefit? What is the benefit? For the Munafiq, what is the benefit? Why? Like if this individual hates the Messenger of Allah, like, okay, why show Islam? Why? What benefit? Sure. What is the motivation of a munafiq to be a munafiq?
It's easier to backstab someone.
Okay. Right? It's easy to win the trust. If you're inside the circle, it becomes easier to attack. Okay, but why? Why would you want to attack the Messenger of Allah?
Didn't they want to have a, I don't know, that friend was funny too, so it's attack.
Sure, but that was in Mecca, right? In Medina, that wasn't the case. They're pretty safe. So, sure, the benefit for that is what happened when the Prophet ﷺ came to Medina. Guess who lost their position? The locals. Abdullah ibn Ubay, which was the head of the Munafiqeen. What happened was that he was actually going to take head of the rulership in Medina. And when the Prophet ﷺ came, guess what he lost? He lost that status and he lost that position. So instead, he became the head of the Munafiqeen. Right? He became head of the hypocrites. They built their own masjid, that we know to be Masjid al-Dirar. Huh? No, so basically they built the masjid so that they could meet, and they asked the Messenger of Allah ﷺ to come and pray there. And why did they want him to come and pray there? Right, because they wanted to encourage people to go. So they built this masjid, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He prohibited the Messenger of Allah ﷺ from praying there. He says, "La tusalli fiha abada." He's like, you will never pray in that place, and it was destroyed. And this was known as a Masjid al-Dirar. Right, this false masjid or deceptive masjid. So these individuals, what do they want? Remember, why does somebody show something? What did we say? It's for status. Right? That's essentially what the motivation was. That they were willing to fake their Islam just so that they could win status with the people and maybe gain something of what they had lost. And that's what he said. Nowadays, is there a major benefit to becoming Muslim? Maybe in some situation. So this is why he says, like, if you look at relatively, and if you look at it like subjectively, there's a lot more motivation then than there is today, right? For a person, for example, in the United States to come to the masjid and to accept Islam, what are the chances that this person is lying? It's very low. It's extremely low. And if they are, is there a chance that they are? Like, what kind of motivation would a person have at that point? Huh? I mean, we're at the Hijra, so we do. Right? So maybe they want to spy, maybe they want to report. Right? There's so many things that people do. Like, people are motivated, but that person, why is he motivated? What is his motivation? It's usually financial, right? Usually, the type of person that does that, it's because they're in some type of financial distress. These guys don't actually get a lot of money, by the way. Like informants, they don't make a lot of money. What happens is but who is an informant? Usually somebody who has some kind of financial distress or some kind of financial problems. And now all of a sudden, somebody who could never hold a job has steady income. It's not a lot, but it's steady. So, it's amazing when I look at the verses where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that يَشْتَرُونَ الْحَيَاةَ الدُّنْيَا, that they purchase this life, and you're like, wow. Like, it just really hits that much more home when it's like, man, there are actually people who do that. They actually sell themselves just for a small share. Like, because like I said, their salaries aren't a lot, but they sold themselves and they sold all this for a small share of the dunya. Let's protect us. Yes? About informants? No, okay. Mhm. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. Mhm. Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. So like the older Muslims will get larger shares. Absolutely. And like I always thought about that. I was like, logically, wouldn't it make more sense to encourage people to give larger shares to new Muslims? Right? Like I was thinking like that. I'm sorry? Yeah. So basically what happened is like the longer you were in Islam, the larger your share during conquests. So, and I was like, well, wouldn't it make more sense to encourage new people to come in by giving them larger shares and then the older ones more? And it was like, no, because the ones who are given, like the older ones, they're going to be more just with that, and it will protect people's intentions. So, it's a good point. Showing off in obligations. Remember we said that, like that was the first series of problems, right? So a person, if they do it in the root of their religion, the root of their worship, that is their iman, and that's nifaq. Yes. Oh, she's just talking about because we're talking about sincerity and motivations. During the conquests, what would happen is that the person who was longer a Muslim, the larger share he would receive during those conquests, and new Muslims would receive smaller shares. And I was like, I would think logically it would be the other way around, but this way it actually preserves sincerity, right? Because those people who are now coming to join and become Muslim, they know they're not going to receive large shares, so it can't be completely financial in what their motivation is. Yes. Yeah. So part of it, like, so this is during Umar. Yeah. Yeah. Right. And the thing is, like, the older companions, they would be given a lot of this wealth, and what would they do with it? They would just distribute it. Like, they didn't feel like they had a need for it. Even Umar radiallahu anhu, during the conquest, when they went toward like Damascus, and he gave the companions the land. So the companions, he would give them the land. Any other booty would be distributed amongst everyone else. And he gave the older companions the land because he knew what would they do with it. They wouldn't hoard it. They would actually put it into public use. Why? Because the way that the land was and the way wealth was in their hearts. So it was definitely, it's a sign of sincerity. So here's some examples he gives, like telling others to give zakat, even though you might not. Fasting during Ramadan, but wanting to break the fast, like when he's by himself. Attending Friday prayers only so that nobody says anything to him. Maintaining family ties or showing kindness to parents due to societal expectations rather than genuine willingness. These examples are kind of tough, right? These examples are kind of tough. I would be more comfortable with him talking about a person who's doing these than chastising someone that is others. Because over here, is this a type of riyah? Yes, it is. Right? We should never do things or not do things for the sake of other people. But is it possible? And like I said, Ghazāli, mashallah, he likes giving the extreme examples. Is it possible that a person encourages others to give zakat and then he himself becomes sincere? Does that happen? It happens. It's not. I don't think it's far-fetched. Or even if a person, he's like, oh man, my parents are gonna bug me because I didn't go for Jummah. And then on his way to Jummah, he's like, no, I should do this for all. That happens, right? He's like, so he's giving extreme examples of somebody who's like very, very rigid and their intention doesn't shift in that way. And these examples come across as very harsh, but he's giving the most extreme example. He's not, it's not meant to talk about like, okay, if we start with that intention, because sometimes we do, right? It's like, oh man, you're going to my uncle's house again. Like, you know what I mean? Like, and we have that, it's like, but what are my parents going to think if I don't go, right? Like we have that sometimes. And then on the way, what happens? Or even while we're there, or even while we're sitting, the nice thing about all of this is that I can have riyah in an action until the action is completed, right? And in the moment before my final taslim, I'm like, man, what am I thinking? I should be doing this for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's sake alone. What happens? Then I get a reward, right? It's easy to switch the intention, right? You know, we can be on a mistaken intention, but the moment that we switch it and we bring it back for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's sake, that's it. That's all it takes. So, you know, like I said, these look a little harsh, but if you look practically on how these are implemented, it's not difficult to change our intention. It's not difficult to correct it. But inshallah, we'll stop here and we'll continue with the discussion, inshallah, next week. And Allah knows best. Allahu sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Nabina Muhammad wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Any questions? No? Yes? Ghazāli. Yeah. Yes. In the deed's over? Yeah. Are you still reading or are you stopped? You're still reading? It's okay, correct your intention in the moment. And if you're done, what can I do? Ask forgiveness. Right? The realization is, the Prophet ﷺ, he said, always follow a bad deed with a good one. So the moment I realized, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will forgive it. And the nice thing is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says that he forgives everything except shirk. Right? So we make these mistakes, they can be overlooked. It's just a matter of seeking tawbah for them. Any other questions? All right, jazakum khair. Subhanaka wa bihamdika wa ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.